Welcome, everyone, to the NYIOP webinar. We'll go ahead and start now, even though people will still be adding on as we get moving more. Today, we are joined by Bruno Michel, who you all see on your screen now with wonderful new glasses, I have to say. It is really, truly a joy to have you here. I'll tell you a little bit about Bruno, then a little bit about how the webinars will work. We will dive in and start getting to the questions. Bruno is currently the casting director at the Théâtre du Chatelet in Paris, which is a beautiful, beautiful theater, very central, probably the most central theater, isn't it, of the big theaters. And you've been there through a lot of things, which we'll get into, in the sense that it was a big opera house. Now you do a lot of different things on and off, a lot of new interesting things like Norma. And also, but what's interesting is Bruno started his career with Robert Gilman as a manager in his office, assistant and a manager, then went to Ascanius as a manager, where he was the first person at Ascanius that was working with the Russians, with Borodina, Hovorsovsky, all of the very big, that Ascanius is well known now as kind of the center of the Russian singer world in the West. And Bruno was there as they started that at the very beginning. After that, he went directly from Ascanius to Théâtre du Chatelet. During his time at Chatelet, he was the opera director in Leipzig for about a year and a half. During his time, he was still working at Chatelet as well. So he's seen a lot of things. I have to say, one of the other things about Bruno that I always find amazing is your language skills. As far as I know, you have to correct me with the ones I don't know, because I know that you speak, obviously, French fluently, French, English, German, Italian, Russian, Spanish. What else is in there?
Portuguese, if it helps.
And Portuguese, so there you have it. Unbelievable. So, in just a moment, we'll get into questions from you guys that are signed on. Let me tell you a little bit about the webinar window that you're looking at there. If you look on the left side of your window, this is for all of you participating. On the left side of your window, you see something that says, it's the one where you see people writing. This is the way you interact with us. Start thinking of your questions and typing them in now, because that's where I find the questions that Bruno and I will cover during this process. I keep track of it constantly. If a question is not being answered, feel free to type it in several times. The point of this webinar is to answer your questions, is to give you the information that you need. So you need to start writing them, and then we will start paying attention to them. And so this is the place that you need to start writing those, and then we'll start covering them. And as we go, we'll guide the discussion as it comes there, and as it goes through a lot of different things. Also, another thing that I wanted to let you know is during the process, every now and then, a window will pop up with a quick survey, just a quick question, because we're trying to work on these webinars to better polish them for your needs. So every now and then, a will pop up. All it does is requires you to tap your answer. They will stay for about 15 seconds and then go away. So answer as quick as you can, and then soon they will just disappear and you don't have to worry about it. And we'll move on. But those questions help us better gauge what's important to you, what things we can bring to you in these webinars, and how we can get you the information that you need. So, let's go ahead and start. Forgive me that every now and then I have to look down. Unfortunately, Ruben, my assistant associate from New York, is stuck on an airplane right now. So let's go ahead. If you have problems with sound and anything else, please write those as well, and we can try to solve them as best as is possible along the way. So, Bruno, let's start with a couple of the questions start coming in. What is always a nice question to start with that people seem interested in is how has this business, you've been in this business in a variety of positions for a bit of time. How has this changed since you started? When you started, what was the focus of the business then, and how has it changed that the focus of finding singers and what you look for and how they're presented to you, how you choose what you look for? How has that changed over the time that you've been casting in the business?
For the worse, if I may say it in one word, it's changed very much for the worse. Everything has become a lot harder than it used to be, considerably harder. There's a lot less money. My theatre, which used to be relatively reputed for its very ample finances, hasn't got quite what it used to have. All the theatres I visit, all the colleagues I speak to, all mention to me that they don't have the money. Planning has become more and more difficult because you have to make do with a lot lesser means. A lot of theatres like to plan very much further ahead than they are planning now. And everything has become more difficult, I have to say. Just absolutely every aspect of life in this business, from our point of view, certainly has become more difficult. When I speak to managers, it seems it has become so also from theirs. So I don't think, unfortunately, the business is evolving terribly well. You know, most theatres are doing less productions. We're not talking about the companies in the US which closed down and things like that. But a lot of theatres who are doing things are planning later. They're cancelling productions. They're doing less productions. It's really becoming more and more difficult. It's more and more competitive for singers. It's really very hard.
When you talk about planning cycles, does this mean, like, give an example? Because obviously those of us on a certain side of the table know what that means, but perhaps a lot of the singers don't know. For example, I remember a few years back when Barcelona was planning, I think, 7 or 8 years ahead of time at one point. And
no longer happens.
I know of theaters in Italy that are still planning for January right now. What was a normal cycle, and what is the cycle now in general that you feel?
For high-level international houses, a few years back, everybody was planned 4 seasons before. Now it's very difficult to go ahead that way. Most very big international houses will have their important new productions planned 3 years ahead. And even then, these could move. I mean, you think you're doing a new Anna Bolena, and next thing you know, you can't afford it because you haven't found your co-producer or things like that. Because all theatres now are really, virtually nobody is planning on doing a new production alone these days. You always find new co-producers and things like that. So a lot of theatres are planning about 3 years ahead. We're not going to talk indeed about Italian theatres, which is pointless, but it's interesting that German big houses are really only planning the very, very big new productions. Like you're going to do a new Meister Singers or something like that, then you are planning it 3 or 4 years ahead. Otherwise, everything else gets planned rather haphazardly, depending on whether you have the finances, whether you have the time, whether you have the singers in your fest ensemble who can do it, and things like that. So a lot of houses now, for instance, German houses will plan their big productions 3 years ahead, and then everything else is planned less than a year ahead, which makes it more difficult. It makes it very difficult for the singers who work in those houses, fest, in the company, because they don't get releases. Because until the year before, you don't know if you're going to sing, what you're going to sing or whatever. It's really very difficult. I see an interesting question there on the side by Miss Rebecca Stanky.
Yes.
The fact that it's become more difficult means that indeed a lot of people are willing to consider local singers, but not for everything. You know, we can't be losing track of the fact that when we're trying to do our work as best as we can, and if I'm planning a new opera or indeed a musical, since we're doing a few, as you said, it is true that given the circumstances we are in now, I will strongly consider local singers, but only for roles which I know I can do that safely with. Basically, without wanting to be detrimental, actually only for small roles. I'll try and save money by taking local singers for which I don't have to pay flights, and for which I can pay lower fees because I know they don't have hotel to pay, for instance, because they live in Paris. But I will only really consider doing that for small roles. If I'm looking at a major role, or even a second role, but like not a comprimario. If I'm looking at a role of a certain importance, and it's a toss between a good international singer and somebody who lives locally in Paris, the fact that the person doesn't have hotel to pay and that I won't have flights to pay is not going to make any difference. I'm still going to take the international singer.
Do you think that to cover one of the things there? Do you think that your colleagues feel the same way, that they are trying to find the local talent, or that they are still certain theaters obviously are always going to be looking for lower priced options, but do you think that theaters still would like to bring people in as much as possible, or do you think that they will sacrifice that?
The general tendency seems to be in many places, whenever possible, to try and resort to local singers. It makes sense anyway, because you're then also feeding the local culture of your country and of your city, which does have an importance. It does seem that some major theaters, and you will understand that I won't be at liberty to give any names, but it does seem that some major theaters will resort to international singers for anything, which would indicate either that they have a lot of money at their hands, or that they're not really counting the little money they have, which is really quite worrying. I can imagine, I've looked at some casting for Figaro, for instance, lately, in some rather big houses, where I found that they've invited a foreign person to do Basilio without the aria, for Marcellina without the aria, for things like that. And I'm telling myself, can you really not find a local Basilio or a local Marcellina in your country? And did you have to invite these expensive singers and pay them whatever it takes them? Because obviously these singers need to pay for their accommodation and everything, so you get to pay their flights and everything. Yeah. And I'm telling myself, can you really not find a Marcellina and a Basilio at home? So it seems that some major theaters do not see that as a major preoccupation. However, speaking with colleagues, it does seem indeed that a lot of our colleagues do make the effort of trying to look locally.
Now, one quick question before we go on to something else that I wanted to lead into, which is young artists and use of that as opposed to local people. But a quick question: do you have in Chatelet and many theaters, but do you have a limitation that you are required, for example, to use a French singer above someone else for certain roles?
Not in France.
Not in France.
I know that it is the law, or at least it's a rule in some Anglo-Saxon theaters, and I know some of my North American colleagues have, by regulations, to use American singers for some roles. It is not required at all in France. There's no form of law of that kind. It is not. No, yeah, you use you wish. It is not required in Italy. It is not required in Britain, and it is not required in Germany, certainly, in the Germanic world.
So then, to step back quickly into this, when we were talking about saving money by using local singers, my question is, I find people tend to, especially in the United States, there's been a bit of an explosion of young artist programs and studios over the past years, and obviously the big theaters always have them. But it seems many of the roles that were once for the local singer or once for the starting singer as a chance to get their foot on stage are now going to the young artists that are there that more or less don't have to be paid. Do you find that this is the case of what's happening in Europe? If you're not going to go into a young artist, then do you have a chance to start these smaller roles?
Yes, you do, because even if there is a profusion of young artist programs, and there's more of them around, there'll never be enough of them to make up for whatever a company needs. If you look at Salzburg, for instance, which a few years ago started a very successful young artist program, which I really recommend because Tony Gratzak there has really been getting some very, very good singers, and the young artist program in Salzburg is very good. Well, he's never able, Tony, if you look at the 10 productions they'll be doing in the summer at Salzburg, there's no way Tony's going to fill all his small roles with young artist program people. It's just, you can't. You have too much role requirements, to be able to do that. If I think of Covent Garden with the Yeti Parker or the Paris Opera, there's no way that the young artist program singers would cover even a quarter of the requirements in small roles. So I think that's not a hindrance for local singers, really, not at all.
Okay. But there's an interesting for unknown singers that are not necessarily young.
Yeah, that is it. But then these people do have a problem in any circumstance. There's an interesting question from Mr. Lumeta. What are the most difficult roles to cast? What farces are most in demand? Well, the farce, as probably what most of you will have noticed, any lyric voice is very much in demand because of they're the most used, but they're also the most frequent. If you're a lyric soprano, if you're a lyric baritone, you'll have a much harder time because there are so many of them everywhere. If you're a Helden tenor, or if you're a tenor, full stop, we all know that you'll be able to get away with murder, and certainly you'll be able to get roles without being very good. Actually, one needs to say that. No, it's true. I mean, if you're a lyric baritone, you have to be phenomenally good to get anything because there are so many of them. Lyric mezzo, likewise. Yet, if you sing Turandot or Brunhilde, and if you sing Siegfried, you can be horrible. But I mean, actually horrible, and you'll be considered even in the main houses in the world because there's nobody left at all who sings that. So in answer to answer that question, the most difficult farce these days are, as far as I'm concerned, Wagner, Verdi, and Strauss. I'm finding it virtually impossible. I mean, I don't do any of it. I casted a Wagner opera lately, but a youth opera, and I would really have a very big problem if I was working in one of those main houses like the Paris Opera or Covent Garden, and if I had to cast an opera by any of those three composers, because as far as I'm concerned, the singers are just not there anymore. Of course, I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to us now will probably beg to differ because they sing Wagner or Verdi. However, I'm talking about taking a recording of any recording of 30 years ago. I'm not even talking historical ones, but just any recording of 30 years ago, and comparing with the choice you have these days, it's really very, very afflicting. Maestro Papano, who's the principal conductor of the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden, as you know, was caught off guard this summer, as some of you may know, saying that it was impossible to cast opera on a high level these days, for which he had
opera on a high level. You cut out, so I'm just filling in, yeah.
He had a problem with that. However, I fully agree with the maestro on this point because he's actually correct. Whether whether it's appropriate that the head of Covent Garden say that, it's another matter, but he's actually right. And I have to say that I find it virtually impossible today to cast most Verdi operas, Wagner operas, or Strauss operas as I would like to.
Mm-hmm.
Simply, as I would like to.
Well, I guess the question that we can come back to there that will be interesting, because we're getting some good questions that I want to dive into, is that why people schedule those operas if they can't cast them would be the big question. Obviously, why does a theater schedule Otello if they have no Otello? And obviously, the ringside I understand, because it will sell out regardless of if you have the singers for it or not. But some operas you don't necessarily. And we know, for example, Mr. Papano and Covent Garden are in a bit of a problem right now with Vespri, because they've now got 3 sopranos in a week for that. let's dive into a couple of these things that are into these questions that are very much more focused in kind of getting an idea of the market and also how you as a casting director, like another thing that I wrote when writing about this, but I'd like to say is, in my experience amongst the casting people I've personally encountered over the past 12 years of doing NYIOP, Bruno has an encyclopedic knowledge of the repertoire, in the sense that I really don't know anyone at all that has more depth of repertoire in his knowledge. In addition to that, he knows singing. He knows singing very well, which sadly is not the case with all of your colleagues, and you know this. But he's not a casting director that casts based on look on the measurement sheet or who the director decides they want. He knows the singing. So it's very good that we have some questions about singing here. Let's dive into a bit of a general one that kind of touches the things here, which is, what do you look for when you cast as far as age, size, acting ability, voice, technique, style? What are the things that you look for specifically when you are looking to cast?
In a word, everything. I mean, to answer you, especially if you're casting, I mean, from my point of view, I work in Paris. This is not a provincial theater. It's very exposed. So, of course, whenever I'm casting a role, I'm trying to look at every factor. I wouldn't say that the physique is the most important thing on my mind, because I'm not a stage director and I'm not very much in the modern conception of the world. However, you can't totally disregard physique. I mean, it's just not possible. Unless you're casting some repertoire, as I was mentioning, if you're casting Wagner or Strauss, for many operas, you'll be lucky to find anybody who can sing them, let alone well. So if the person looks awful and has a terrible physique, I'm afraid if you're casting a Siegfried or an Electra, you're just going to have to take whoever you can find. Physique is important, but it's not the most important thing as far as I'm concerned. I'm more concerned with age as far as physical factors are concerned, because I'm getting more and more wary of people not doing what they should be doing for their age, because the body looks a certain age even from a distance, and also because the voice sounds a certain age. Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm currently casting a Skiki, and one other thing, I started delving back into it. I read a bit about it, starting to work. And one of the things that's very interesting is that Puccini specified the age ranges for Skiki more closely than any other opera he did. Actually, in most operas, he didn't specify an age at all. And if you look at Skiki, Puccini specifically requested and indicated ages. Now, these ages have to be taken as a guideline, because if you know Skiki, Simone is supposed to be 70 and Zita is supposed to be 60. Now, if you find a bass and an alto who can still sing Simone and Zita at these ages, let me know. But so you're not exactly going to be taking age, literally. However, you do need to have a certain notion of age. For instance, one of the problems with Kiki is that Rinuccio and Lauretta need to be two young people. I mean, they just need to be. In spite of the fact that Avete Torto, the aria of Rinuccio, is actually really very difficult to sing for a young guy, because it's nothing to do with light stuff. And in spite of the fact that Lauretta is actually much lower, the aria is very low and central, and it's a lot lower than what most young lyric soprano would feel easy with. If I take a Lauretta or a Rinuccio who are in their 40s, they're going to look in their 40s on stage, and it's not going to work because they're going to be the same age as all the other old relatives. So age is an important thing. It's really very important. I've just finished casting a Rossini opera, and it's very important to be able to cast it with people who look the part. It doesn't matter if they're thin or fat or anything like that, but if they look likely in the part, if you saw them, you think that this could be this person. So age is that. Aside from that, I'm really, of course, naturally looking for musical qualities. I'm always very sensitive to the color, the natural color of the voice, the beauty of the timbre. And that's not something, of course, one can work upon. You either have a lovely voice, a lovely timbre, or not. Try and develop it a bit with age, but overall, you have a lovely timbre. So I look for that. To technique, to vocal production, of course, how the voice is produced, if it's open enough, if it's not throaty, if it's well positioned.
Very interesting. I think that, wait just a moment, because you're breaking up a little bit, and we're going to get back into this. What you were saying, just because I could hear you, so I'll pass it on there. You were talking that you like a very beautiful timbre, and the technique must be good, and something interesting and nuanced. But then you brought up at the end the very interesting of diction. Interesting thing of diction.
Articulation is very important. I mean, very important. I just did an audition today with 6 people for Schicchi, for Lauretta. And I had mainly people with no voice or scarcely none at all to sing Puccini. I mean, I had really light over the orchestra. And I had one girl who had the voice, really a Puccini voice, yet she's Georgian. And she virtually sang in Georgian. I mean, it sounded like she'd never been out of Tbilisi, and the style was rather awful, and I'm not going to take her because of that. So text is very important indeed. A lot of operas, you really have to articulate. Of course, it's more important for some than others. Schicchi I'm doing now, like Falstaff, is very text-oriented, and I'm going to have to be more careful about that, with this. Other factors I'm really very careful with is intonation. A lot of people from the East have serious intonation problems. I mean, I don't want to generalize, but a lot of people from Eastern countries they seem to consider intonation optional.
You've a little broke up. Hold on a second. I have to say
that was... question here.
Yes, please.
I see a question here which I find virtually impossible to answer. What do you consider the optimal age for heavier soprano roles? That's way too generic a question to, Of course, if a heavier soprano role needs to be cast, it must be cast by somebody of a certain age already, because generally speaking, nobody has a voice to sing these roles at age 25. However, what is a heavier soprano role? Strauss? Verdi? I mean, it's too generic to consider. And then each role has a very specific requirement. I can't answer that. It's too general. Sorry.
But would you say, would you, I think that what she was meaning more than anything is, there is this constant rush these days to get into, like Anya wrote earlier, Verdi soprano takes a while to develop. These heavier voices take a while to develop, and there is a rush to youth in a lot of places these days. And would you say, because I can speak to this, because also Anya, in the United States, many times you're told that if you're 25, 26, 27, and your career hasn't already started, that you are late in the game, and you are made to feel somehow at the grand old age of 30, if you haven't really begun, even if you're in heavier role, that you might as well just look for a different job. And that's not an unusual thing. And so for a European to hear that somebody at 27 is told that they should already have sung their first Aida, or they might as well move to Nebraska, is a little bit different. It's a little off-putting. So I think what I'm trying to look for is if say you're 35 years old and you're only starting to dip your toe into Aidas and Forzas, but that's where you're going to live, is that too old? Is there still a place for you for that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Although you mentioned Aida and Forza in the same sentence, I really don't feel those two roles are
They're
no
different.
comparison. Yeah, no, that's a thing. Yeah, I think so. Not everybody may agree, but I mean, prayer and denial is to me needs still a certain command of Yanni that you may not require anymore. The same soprano is 5 years down the road from Aida. If you know what I'm saying.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to, Bruno, you're going to have to say that again because your mic was cutting out very much random snippets, which were very evocative. But just basically start again because sometimes
Okay.
we hear,
I was just
sometimes we
saying.
don't.
I was just saying. I was just saying that to me, Forza and Aida, for instance, are not the same voice. Forza is a more dramatic voice than Aida, for instance, and soprano should probably consider Forza 5 years down the road from the point where she's singing Aida,
Mm-hmm.
if you know what I'm saying. But um, as far as age, really very difficult. You're telling me that some people you're saying in America, if you haven't started your career at 25, nobody has these views because it's wrong. Again, it depends on the voice. One of the problems I've consistently with time is for basses. As we know, basses mature later, and young basses really have a hard time finding work because they either end up singing old stuff like Gremlin or things like that, the business in singing at age 25. So it really depends on your voice. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Lyric voice can start earlier, naturally. But I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't as extreme as what you just said. Like, if your career hasn't started when you're 25, then you're done. It's not true for anybody.
No, so what you're saying is for certain repertoire, 35 is not a problem at all.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But then again, it also depends on the role. You see, what I was mentioning, one of the issues I have is that I want singers to be looking fairly credible. Is that correct French? English? I want singers to look
Yeah, well,
likely and
yeah,
credible.
physically, meaning yeah, I understand. Okay.
You know what I'm saying? If you're singing Manon from Massenet, it says everywhere that Manon is 15 or 16, I don't remember. If the girl is obviously 55, then it's a problem for me.
Exactly. Cavalier's butterfly is a little difficult to.
That is the problem. It's funny, I was just going to mention that. One of the main issues for me, not the main, but one of the important issues with Butterfly is that she says that she's 15. Yeah. Now, it's very difficult to cast the role because I can't help thinking, whenever I look at a Butterfly these days, with very few exceptions, you're talking of a very large woman who's in the late 40s.
Yes.
Whenever she plays that part, I'm finding myself thinking, maybe the producer should have cut the line because, it's difficult not to laugh. So there are issues there. There are issues. It's really very, very difficult. One has that we're in a very different world than what we were in 100 years ago, when these age people had when they sang Butterfly or Leonora Fidelio or things like that. You're horrified. So sometimes age 25 indeed. However, you have to realize that most girls at that time wouldn't have considered having a career past 35. Usually, with 19th century, at age 35, you marry a man and,
Exactly. Like Olivero did, but then she came back.
So the problem is today, if people want to have a long enriching career. And of course, you shouldn't be singing butterfly before age 25. However, ideally, if I'm ever going to qualify, I would try and find somebody who has a certain physique, who looks young. Even if she's not necessarily very young, she should look young, because otherwise it becomes stupid.
Very interesting. Now let me move to a couple of things that people have asked here, which is very interesting, which is kind of an idea of what the market is for certain voice types, in the sense that which Fox are more in demand. Like you spoke earlier, that obviously if you're singing the bigger repertoire, then pretty much anyone can get in the door, as long as you can get through it and don't bleed. However, what would you say is the market for specific questions we've had is dramatic sopranos, for high tenors in France and Germany. Specific, which voice types are there in abundance beyond just saying lyric voice types? For example, I notice a lot of theaters, and actually we wrote about it earlier today, are doing a lot of the unknown Rossini or the lesser known Donizetti these days. And that brings entire new worlds of problems into casting directors, in the sense that there is a lot of repertoire that obviously we don't necessarily have singers that do that anymore,
right.
And certainly not a lot of them. What particular voice types, other than bass and anything Wagnerian, are particularly being sought after these days, would you say?
Difficult to answer. If you mean by sought after, what is the largest available? I would certainly say the lyric roles, because these are the ones that occur most often. If you look at the planning of an opera house, and if you ask more lyric soprani, more lyric baritones, because a lot of them are like that way, you know. However, if you mean by this question, which roles are the most sought after because everybody knows they're difficult to find, it is indeed the dramatic roles. Yeah.
Always.
I mean, if you're going to do a Turandot, if you need to look at Turandot, you have a problem. A fair amount of Puccini. I mean, heaven forbid anybody would want to do Fanciulla.
Which they do. Three productions in the past year.
They do. And the tenor roles, as I said, most tenors have it easier because, as you know, it's a less frequent voice, generally speaking, in mankind, and tenors are rare. 8 tenors are than lower voices, so you'll have easier time as a tenor anyway. And I think it is true to say that in any tenor fact, people manage to get work that are less good than in many other voices.
Now, with that, I mean, one of the things that comes to my mind is, I think it was 2 years ago they did Rossini, that Renee did at the Met, that she had done years ago. What?
Is it not?
I don't. No. I think it was a famous Rossini that has 3 major tenor roles, and I remember Lenore Rosenberg, Armida. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, and no, it was Armida that they did, and I remember Lenore Rosenberg talking about the fact that not only did they have to find 4 tenors, not only 4 tenors that each of them had a visible place, but Lenore had to find covers and second covers for them. So every night they had to have 16 Rossini tenors available. And at one point, I remember, it was very interesting because Larry Brownlee was singing one of, not the lead role, but the second of the tenors, quote unquote, but covering the first of the tenors. And one night the first tenor canceled, and so what happened is the entire thing, all of this shifted, because Larry moved another role, a cover went on, another cover had to come through. It's quite fascinating. Yeah. All of these things. It's quite very fascinating. Now, a question into some specific things. Auditions. When you hear audition, what do you like to see? What do you not like to see? What in your experiences, both when you were an agent and also casting now, what are the things that most stick out in as to successful things in auditions or not successful things?
Many factors, of course. All indicated to you before when you asked. I'm interested in the quality of the sound. With other factors, however, that one looks at. For instance, the simple question, not as simple as that, of and
come back to the simple question, because I did the simple question. From the simple question is there, it cut out completely for me.
Yeah. So you're not sorry. So for instance, one of the things it is something that they should present in that this comes together. You know, a Spieltenor role actually forget in, and the guy came into la lagrima and actually awful. And I thought, for crying out loud, don't you think the Hoffman, or you think something from Mozart, think Trio? Do you know what I'm saying? So one thing that really worries me a lot and makes me very angry at times is the choice of repertoire. Some singers do not know what to present in auditions. For instance, long arias. When you're auditioning for a theatre, you cannot imagine to have 20 minutes listening to you. Some people present some arias in audition that are ridiculous, or Quante Volte from Capucci Montecchi, or some, coloratura soprano presents the whole of Zerbinetta, even the whole of the Traviata's first act aria is too long. A lot of people do not understand that when you're coming, you have the maximum in which you have to present two appropriate areas, which are both suitable for your voices and for the repertoire you're auditioning for. You should not, some people present the Schluss in a thing for 15 minutes and they don't understand why I don't want to hear a second area. Things like that are very important. In audition,
Bruno, hold on just a second, Bruno, because some people are having some sound issues where they're really catching about every third or fourth word. Can we, let's take a second. Let's try this. Could you try something for us to see if it helps the sound? Would you just go to the cam button above you? Because I think it's an internet speed issue. And just push the cam, turn off your cam for a moment. To see. Now just keep talking. Can we still hear you?
It's better.
Please, everyone, type in and let me know if the sound is better with the camera off.
Can go on that way if you want. That's no problem for me, but I'm not sure if it's any better for anybody else.
When, just now, you were telling, where you started to answer about this, you were telling a story about someone came in singing an audition. Would you just tell us that again, because we really missed it, actually, completely.
This person auditioned for a Spieltenor role, a character tenor. He was put forward for a Spieltenor role, which is Gerardo Benskiki. It's a character tenor role. The guy is a character tenor, and he came in audition Una furtiva lagrima singing Belmonte. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Of areas that are written and that are demonstrative and that can be used for a singer to present as a Spieltenor areas. I don't know if you sing, the servant area from Hoffman. He could sing Pedrillo's area. He could sing Monotato's area. He wanted to sing Una furtiva lagrima. It was awful. It was actually awful. And it showed total ignorance of what repertoire is about and immense stupidity. Just for that, engage this person.
It's very difficult.
The choice of repertoire is a major issue for audition. When I say that some people present extremely long arias, some people come on and present you with an 11, 12-minute arias. You cannot assume that a director has
time
make whatever in 3 minutes.
Absolutely. Bruno, let's do something because it's still cutting out a little bit there. Would you, can we do this? Do you still have the link from signing in? Because I think that what's happened is that you've gotten into a weird internet cycle of slow internet. I'm going to disconnect you right now and then just go back to the link and sign in again, okay? And it's probably going to be a lot better, okay? So please forgive me. Just come back and see us in just a second, okay? Great. I'm still here with everyone. So, it's very interesting because Bruno and I were on together for a good 40 minutes before we started this, half an hour, and he actually had the best internet speed of anyone that we've done these webinars with, so that there was no echo, there was no anything, but I think that possibly somebody has started downloading large numbers of movies from iTunes off of his web, possibly. So listen, when he comes back on, we will go back and, thank you, Sibel. Thank you very much. It's my mellifluous tones. When he comes back, what I want to do is I want to ask him to talk about what he was saying about auditions again, because I think that was something very interesting for us to get into and something that I think everybody wants to know about. But then on top of that, I think I want to get into more about his specific casting decisions. What I think would be interesting, and nobody's asked a question about this, but tell me if you think it would be interesting. Feel free to let me know, is the fact that so many things go into a casting situation, and Bruno's in a specifically, I didn't hear it, Anya, so I can't yet. That's why we have to ask. Specifically, Bruno's in a situation where he has very rigorous limits in how he can cast things. He's not so free in the sense that he has very specific conducts and directors as to how he casts things, and in addition to that, he also has a variety of repertoire in the sense that he was recently casting The King and I for a French audience in the Chatelet. It's very interesting to see what actually goes into that process so that artists can understand that really it's not just about how you sing or if he likes you. Sometimes really it's about a whole lot of other things that have nothing to do with that. To touch a couple of the things that I did hear, because also I was losing some of the sound, and Bruno's not quite signed back on yet, so I'm keeping an eye out for when he pops back on. Hold on 2 seconds, I'm going to message him. But, yeah, we scared him off. But what he was saying about the audition rep is that someone came in, a Spieltenor came in, more or less, and sang Belmonte, and when he, in reality, should have been singing Pedrillo, is what he was saying in essence, and that what happens is he may be an average Spieltenor, he may be an average Belmonte, but he could have been a very good Pedrillo. And the problem is that he chose his repertoire completely poorly, and so his audition really didn't work in that sense, that the impression he made wasn't that he might be a very good Pedrillo. The impression was that to quote Bruno, that it was a very stupid choice, is exactly what he said, and that when you come in offering repertoire, that isn't necessarily ideal for you, then sometimes it's not. This goes a little bit towards oh, this is scary. This could be interesting. It says that it's not letting him back on because there's too many people on. Get out. Sorry. No. Hold on a moment and we'll solve this. But that the repertoire that you choose, somebody asked earlier if you should take lighter repertoire and people will see you as heavy, or if you should sing a little heavier repertoire and then they will see that in the future you could be Leonora, Trovatore, etc., etc. And I will ask him that when he comes back on. Let me see what's going on as far as we have 30 people on. I'm very surprised if it would be. Let me send him specifically an invitation to join. If you'll bear with me just a moment, since I can't type and think. My wife likes to tell me that women are capable of doing a lot of things at one time and men are not. And I have to say, in this particular moment, that's kind of the truth. Nice. So just bear with us a second, and I may actually have to get on the phone with him to find out what's going on. It's not very elegant this way, but this is actually the first time that we've had this problem. That we've run out of space. So it's fascinating. I suppose that I have to find out how to deal with this. Pardon me a moment. You'll hear talk to yourself. That's a difficult question, Yelena, in my experience. Hold on, I'm going to talk to Bruno and then I'll get back to that in just a moment. So is it telling you that you can't sign on because there are too many people on that? So give me just a moment. Okay, so bear with me a moment. Very strange, very interesting. And let me see if I can fix this quickly. Bear with me, guys. Trust yourself. Give me just a moment, Bruno, okay? Forgive everyone. Just takes a second. Having to change some settings because indeed it says that we've hit the maximum capacity and Bruno can't sign back in. So it probably wasn't smart to ask him to leave the meeting. It seems that he needed to stay in or it wouldn't have been an option. Come back. Hold on just a moment, Bruno, and we'll see here. Very strange. See if you can just click the thing again. See if you can click it again. I just with a direct thing. Did you see that? Yes, do this. Say resend. Say resend. Uta, you don't have to go because Bruno's signing back in. So. Just do it as you can, and I'm talking at the time, okay? I'm going to leave you on the telephone here, and I'll check in, okay? Okay? Thank you, Bruno. Thank you. So thank you very much, very much. The problem is that he's stuck in a cycle that he is having to register again to come in. That might be a good one. He's just seeing if it's possible. So he's going to be coming back in. Let me go ahead and answer the question that Yelena was asking. If you're auditioning for a smaller role, should you not sing leading role arias? It's difficult because if you're auditioning for, as Bruno and I were joking earlier, for Antonio the Gunner, it's not as if you can audition with that. So you have to sing other things and trust that you'll be seen as somebody potential for that. And many casting directors will see it that way. Obviously, you don't want to come in if realistically you should expect to get Antonio the Gardener, then you don't want to come in and sing a 25-minute Shayna from something expecting that you're going to amaze us with your 20-minute aria experiences, because we don't need that. And you have to be realistic about the possibilities of what you could about what you could be cast for, in the sense that if you don't think that you're going to be cast for Anna, if you think that realistically you could be cast for Barbarina, then choose something a little more appropriate, something that's more simple, something that's more contained, shall we say. Because long arias, like Bruno was saying, excuse me a moment, Bruno. Yes, Bruno. Can you enter a different email address when you come in? Can you enter a different email address than the one you have? That's the only email address you have. Yes? Okay. Can you dial in via telephone is a question that somebody has just asked me. I can... Okay. Okay. It's taking you back through the cycle again. Okay. I see. So let me continue. I've got my ear, Bruno. If you need to ask me, then just do this. But I want to continue answering a couple things while people are waiting here. I hate to say it, but it's something that Bruno was talking about there. Yes, the shorter the aria, the better. This is the truth. In the sense, now you've been promoted. You've been promoted now, so you can You can open the cam, push the cam button, Bruno, and come on. Everything's fine now. And you can speak as well. You hear me, Bruno? You're not muted anymore. You can speak
Okay,
now.
fine.
Okay, so there we go. Bruno is back. Can you speak a little bit, Bruno, and let us see if we hear you better?
Yeah. I hope to be able to go on.
Oh, beautiful. It's much better. Some of the things that have been asked while you were away, and then we can get back to what you were saying before, great. And turn your, actually don't touch anything, because if it's working, it's good. Some of the things that were asked is as simple as, is the shorter the aria, the better? And in addition to that, certain things like if you want to be considered for small roles, what do you sing? Does that mean you sing excerpts from that small role, or do you sing other arias if you want to be considered for the small role? What do you think about this?
Okay, generally speaking, short arias are always good for auditions. I wouldn't say the shorter the aria, the better. But provided you stay within the 3 or 4 minutes range, then you're fine. Presenters get bored when you start presenting a 7 minutes aria. Yeah. 7 minutes is long because you usually get to sing 2 arias. So 7 minutes plus another 4 is way too much. Presenters don't like that. And also it's generally considered, right or wrong, but it's generally considered that you should be able to make your mark and to get yourself noticed in under that time. With many singers, frankly, I mean, you and I have sat on thousands of auditions, and with many singers, very, very many singers, within 20 seconds, you know what the singer can do. Of course, you need to check further along the area, if he has the coloratura, and if he has this or if he has that. But generally speaking, within 20 seconds, you know 80% of what you need to know about the singer. And that's a fact about a lot of auditions. Yeah.
I agree. Welcome.
Yeah. Now, to answer your question, if you're auditioning about small roles, of course, don't sing parts of the small roles because they don't demonstrate enough. What an audition area needs to have is demonstrative capacities. So you need to find an area, several actually. You need to find several areas that are able to demonstrate all your capacities within about 3 minutes. So if you're auditioning for a small role, present a good mainstream aria from your repertoire that shows what you can do. Yeah.
But then the question that somebody asked here, which is, you said, okay, you've got 20 seconds. It's being very liberal of you to say, but how do you improve that 10 seconds, 20 seconds that you have before to see if someone's interested? What is it that you want to see in that time to make you interested? And furthermore, does that mean that if you are going to sing something with a recitativo, do you cut the recit and start straight with the aria? What do you do? What's your opinion?
Not necessarily. If the audition is not very good, I often ask to cut the recit in the second aria. If somebody's kind of bored me already in the first aria, then I ask them to kindly sing the second aria without the recit because there's no point. Yeah. It's not necessarily any point cutting the recit because some Mozart arias, for instance, have amazing recitatives and you can show a lot with them. Yeah. No, honestly, as I say, a lot of times you can see what, how good a singer is in 10 or 20 seconds. How to improve on it is up to the artist. Sometimes you don't start an audition well. Some people, in the first 20 seconds, they lack confidence or something hasn't happened. they're offset by the pianist. A lot of things can happen. In order to improve that, you need to first yourself be aware that in the beginning of the aria you were not at your best. You need to be aware of that. A lot of singers do not hear themselves and don't listen to themselves. You need to really be very focused on how you're doing. And if you feel that you haven't done your best within the next, in the first 20 seconds, then it's up to you, if you know well the aria you're singing, to use the opportunities the arias give. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Every aria, every good audition aria has opportunities now and again. Now and again, on that bar you'll have a possibility. On this phrase you'll have a possibility. If you know your job well, if you know what you're doing, and if you're telling yourself, "Ooh, this hasn't started off at its best," then give 200% on that piano filato, or try and, what I'm saying, work on the phrasing on that phrase where shows the best. Yeah, really hit it on that top without being vulgar and too much. So it's really up to you to determine how you're going to try and fix it if you think you haven't started well.
So what you mean by what you mean about this, a singer should listen to themselves, you don't mean orally they should listen to the sounds they're making. You mean that they need to be realistic with themselves as to this was my best, that wasn't my best, and since it didn't start at my best, I need to bring it back around, because honestly, they're probably not interested at this point. I need to see if I can hook them again, basically.
Indeed, of course, you're correct. When I said listen to themselves, I don't say orally, because you don't have the possibility of doing that when you're singing. But when I say listen to yourself, I mean listen to your body. If you know yourself, if you've trained properly, you can pick up symptoms in your body of something that you haven't done well. Yeah, that you can work it. But even listening to yourself orally, if you haven't paid attention to intonation and you've sung a certain note low, then you should know. I mean, intonation you can hear orally, very much so. Yeah. Then listen to yourself in as much as I'm saying, be aware constantly of what you're doing and what your experience is telling what you're doing. Because, of course, you're not listening to yourself from an outsider's point of view, so it's difficult. But with experience, you can tell if you're doing well and not well. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to everything. A lot of singers do not pay attention to anything. They just open the tap and they just sing. Whatever happens around them, they just do the aria. Pay attention. Pay attention to the pianist. Pay attention to so many things all the time.
You had mentioned earlier, because this was something you touched on at the very beginning, actually at the very beginning when we first were having the sound issues, and I think it got lost because I heard it and several people didn't. Intonation that you mentioned, and that's one of the things that's just absolutely inflexible, that one must sing on pitch. And that was something last week Daniel Biaggi mentioned, and the week before Bill Pallant mentioned. Why is it that intonation seems such an issue? I'm a little confused as to that.
Because one would tend to assume that intonation isn't, because anybody who's a professionally trained singer and who's auditioning for a major theater would be assumed to have good intonation. However, it's a fact of life that it's not. It is not. And you and I hear people every day who have intonation problems. And what is worse, you hear people with intonation problems on stages every day, not in audition, performing roles. Yeah?
Yeah.
So, one thing I say cursorily, and I don't want to be mistaken for that, but it's true. In a lot of Eastern schools, intonation is seen as secondary. And it has always been the case, less so now, but still, that any singer who trains properly and who comes out very well trained from Russia or from Ukraine or from a lot of Slavic countries considers that intonation is not that important. Top note, it is okay. And you hear that all.
But do you think that the intonation issue is a part of the vocal style or the technique that's taught? Or do you think they're actually taught, don't worry so much about singing on the notes?
Indeed, I know that to be the case because I speak Russian and I've lived with Russian singers many years and I've dealt with them a lot. These people usually have an ironclad technique. They can sing any way they like. Very often their technique is so solid. We in the West should take an example on a lot of their technical singing. However, they often feel that it's not that important. What's important? Yeah, I have a beautiful voice.
You know, a big voice.
Yeah, or a big voice.
Now, to cover another question before I want to get into a different area that I find that we were talking about briefly there. But the last question here is, it is something that we hear in the United States often, which is when you go to Europe, you must present a Mozart aria, always.
I saw that question. It's a very interesting, very good question. Thank you very much. By and large, it is true. It is actually true. And I'm going to say this by and large, as a rule of thumb, it is true. I happen to be one of those people, but it seems that a lot of my European colleagues are of the same opinion, that you see everything with Mozart. I mean, you see everything. So many people can get away with so much. So many things can be, skirted around. And so many singers have a problem with something, and with some repertoire, they just sing loud, or they sing fast, or, Mozart you cannot cheat with. A lot of Mozart you simply can't cheat with, and it requires so much in terms of not just singing as well, but style. For instance, a lot of people can manage to blast their way through an aria by singing loud. And with Mozart, you can't. It requires a huge amount of style and thinking, which you can't get by with. A lot of coloratura arias from the bel canto composers in Italy, you just come up with a coloratura and you're fine, which is actually not true. That's what people think. But, they think they can impress you. They sing Rosina and they impress you with the coloratura, or they sing, when you start to sing Mozart, it all of a sudden everything comes into place. And I find in many ways I do require a singer to present one Mozart aria because generally speaking with that, if you have uncertainties with the Mozart aria, it's funny because I said before that usually about a singer within 20 seconds. Sometimes you don't. There are these 20% cases where by the end of the first aria, you're not sure and you need to hear more. In cases like that, nearly always, if you hear a Mozart aria, Now, I need to add something to that. I fully realize that for some voices, a Mozart aria is not possible. Dramatic voices will not necessarily have it in them to sing a Mozart aria. So I'm not necessarily always going to demand a Mozart aria. If somebody's auditioning for a Siegfried, I know that it's very unlikely that they'll have a Mozart aria in them, so I'm not going to ask. Yeah? I don't want to be fascistic about it, if you know what I'm saying. Yeah? If somebody's auditioning for Eboli, and if their repertoire is that, it's very likely that they're not going to have a Mozart aria. But generally speaking, every time somebody's auditioning for a lyric role, if they don't have a Mozart aria, I'm worried.
But she brings up a good question, which is you specifically mentioned Eboli and other things, for that type of mezzo, and I'm actually fascinated, you know more repertoire than most humans I've ever met. For a young Eboli, for a budding mezzo-soprano that is not an old mezzo, even singing Marcellina's aria, but is not Dorabella anymore or Idamante, what is there for that voice? And is a concert aria acceptable if there's something there? Because there is a hole in Mozart for mezzos, especially between Cherubino, Dorabella, and Marcellina. What would you suggest from some of the lesser known operas, maybe?
Actually, for this kind of voice, I would suggest not singing a Mozart aria because there isn't anything. There isn't. What are you going to sing, Vitellia? It's not. No. I would say if you have that voice and if you're auditioning for that repertoire, maybe sing a Rossini aria. Some Rossini arias are manageable for people with a very strong bottom range and a strong voice like that. What do you think? But no, as I said, Mozart is not necessarily going to be good for everybody. That's what I want to say. Yeah.
Well, I guess also
it's good for most voices.
In a nutshell, you also have to think that if the Mozart repertoire doesn't really have any roles that fit you because you can't find an aria that fits where you are right now, then the chances of you getting cast in a Mozart aria have gone down significantly because you don't fit in any Mozart opera.
Absolutely. But we're talking about auditions here. We're talking about audition programs. Yeah.
Now, let me switch because we've got about maybe 10, a little bit more minutes left here. But I want to switch because one subject that I think is very meaty that I'd love to get into, and we may have to continue at another time, is as a casting director, there are, and you especially, I know this because we're friends and we talk, but the outside forces that influence how you cast something, meaning if it's an early music conductor that wants to do a modern piece, if it is your boss has decided he wants to cast it with all people of a certain nationality that are under 22 years old, if the director has said, I absolutely have to have people who look good in mauve, all of these things, and I know that you particularly have been in a number of these type of things. What type of things, explain to us, because most artists don't know this, what type of things actually go into influencing how you can cast something that artists would never know because they think that it's about the singing in the audition? Explain a little bit.
Right. Okay. You've mentioned three situations here which are really very different. Two of them are similar, but one of them is extremely different. You've mentioned what a conductor may require of me and what a director may require of me. It's extremely different from what my boss requires of me, because you mentioned outside forces. Indeed, the general director of my theater is an outside as much as he's not me. However, I cannot consider him as an outside force because he is my boss. He's the general director of the theater. He's the one who sets the policy of my theater, and therefore, whatever his requirements are has to be mine, even if I don't agree with them. If he's telling me, indeed, you've got to cast all these roles by people of a certain nationality, which has happened, I have to simply make allowances for that and do whatever he tells me. So as far as I'm concerned, that is not an outside influence. That is just what my boss is telling me to do, and I'm paid to do that.
Which is something at the same time that many artists don't realize, is that every casting director that sits there has a boss who has set an idea for the theater.
Yeah, and gives you instructions. So it's difficult, but you have to live with it because that's what it is. Yeah. My boss, for instance, has very often put financial limitations to my work. He often says, we don't have that much money for this opera and we don't have a great budget, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to find singers that don't have fees above that.
Which makes sense.
This is really extremely frustrating because it really limits yourself. It limits me enormously. However, this is not an outside influence. It's just what my boss is telling me to, and I have to do that because I'm paid to do it. Outside, what I really would call outside influences, as you've mentioned them, are directors and conductors. When I first started doing this job, I used to be very impressed by these people. I used to think that conductors were like gods, because they had this magic wand, literally. And I've realized with time that not invariably, but so frequently, conductors are wrong about casting. But I mean, wrong, really wrong.
Really?
And of course, we're not going to talk about producers because they nearly only have physical requirements, and they have no idea nor any interest for the way a person sings. So these are two outside influences that I have to contend with in my life. I have developed, I think, a certain working relationship with my boss, and I've developed a certain reputation in the business to allow myself, after 15 years at Chatelet, not to take these people's opinion into consideration. I mean, simply.
You mean the conductor?
Yeah. I just simply don't want to hear about that, because if you start listening to what a conductor has to say, and if you start listening to what a director has to say, you nearly invariably go down the wrong path for casting. Yeah. I regularly get emails from managers saying, "Oh, Maestro such and such likes her very much, and he's worked with her. And if you're working with him, then you like to work with her." And I stop immediately. I will decide who I work with, not the Maestro such and such, who's being paid to conduct in our theater, and who's not the one who's making the decision. So when conductors or directors make requirements, I listen to them, and I'll take it into consideration, of course, but I will not be put under pressure. I just simply won't be put under pressure.
But let's be realistic. In this day and age, when we know that the director has so much influence, and the director comes to you and says, "I'm going to cast the entire group in bikinis," the whole Meistersinger in bikinis, that does, of course, affect, it has to, the way that you would cast something. Or if he comes in and says, for example, like the Beato and Führung in Komische Oper, "We need to know it's mean it's going to be nude from the beginning to the end." That affects you, not only in the sense that you have to find somebody that the audience horribly would need to look at all night, but you also have to ask the artist about that. You're getting options down.
Absolutely. In a situation like the one you've described, the first thing I would do would be to go to my boss and say, "Do you really want to work with this director? I mean, do you really want him to stage the piece?" If the answer is yes, because, sometimes there are situations where in the preliminary discussions with the director, the theater decides to close the discussion and no longer work with that person because they think whatever the director is demanding is outrageous. If the director requires something that I find outrageous and I'm being told that I have to go ahead with it, I will take it into consideration. I'll take it into consideration. I will, however, not necessarily cast according to that. I'm not going to be casting people on the grounds that they look good in a bikini to answer your question. Yeah.
No.
I'll cast the roles as best I can with the best people I can think of. And if, for instance, I have a requirement like that, and if at the end I'm finding myself with 3 good singers, if I have at the end a short list between 3 possibilities for a role, and they are roughly equally good, I'm going to tell myself which one will look good in the bikini then. And maybe then, as a last factor, we'll make the decision. However, if the 3 final contestants are markedly different in quality, and if there's one that's really phenomenally better than the other ones, I'm going to make a recommendation to my boss that we engage him, even if he's not attractive and even if he wouldn't look good in a bikini.
Very interesting. So, just ask the last question, and then we're going to have to kind of draw it to a little bit of a close here, which is, I'm a little confused by this a little bit, Mark, but should we be concerned if a conductor really likes us? Does that mean that if we know that many conductors will bring their singers, quote unquote, we call it, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Do casting directors in general not like it when a conductor says, "This is who I want"?
Indeed, they often don't. But it really depends. It's a cool question. It's a question of respective power. I mean, a lot of it is about ego in this business, unfortunately, and about power. Conductors, when they say they like somebody, or directors, often like to push their people forward because they want to see how far they can get away with imposing things on you? Often. Very often. Now, depending on who if you're Telemann in today's world, I wouldn't say you can get away with imposing anybody you want, because I'm sure that even in Bayreuth, Mr. Telemann has to step down at times, and Miss Wagner tells him, look, I'm sorry, I know you like her maestro, but I like her and I will be taking her instead. I'm sure that happens even with Telemann. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you're a very powerful, very important, very renowned conductor, you might get away indeed with being able to impose some of the singers you like upon a theater. However, my experience over the last few years is that this is happening less and less. But I mean really less and less. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Indeed, to answer your question, it is very likely that you're going to upset a theater by imposing a singer, because they feel that their prerogatives are being infringed upon. They're nagged by a manager. The manager sends email saying, oh, you know, the maestro such and such insists on this person being engaged and everything. And you feel that you're being cornered into something. Nobody likes that. It's often indeed counterproductive. Now, of course, there are situations where a conductor recommends a singer and the singer is actually good and you like them. So at this point, you go ahead, of course. Yeah. But it is not necessarily a good thing to be liked by a conductor if your manager, and that's the key person there, doesn't apply this gently. If a manager is the type who's going to pester a theater and he's going to force you down the theater's throat, then it's not a thing. But if you apply gently, it never hurts anybody to have a compliment. You know, if a conductor says they like you, it's good, generally speaking. It becomes less good when the theater is being pushed into something. Yeah.
So then you brought up one of the hot subjects, which I think that we should jump into a little bit, and then we'll draw things to a close if we can kind of go another 10 or 12 minutes just because of all of the technical things, if you don't mind. Is that okay? Okay. Let's bring things quickly there, but could you touch on the role of managers quickly? Do you care if an artist has a manager? Do you care if you don't, if you like them? And the true effect of if a manager, how much power a manager has.
Okay. On principle, if a singer comes to me without a manager, I'll still give them due consideration. I'll read their biography. I'll ask them for an MP3. I'll listen to it just as if they didn't have representation, because it would be unfair and stupid of me to discard somebody just because they don't have a manager. On principle. In reality, good people attract good managers. That's my opinion. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it is my opinion that if you are really either actually good or potentially good, you will attract a manager's opinion eventually, and you will have one. If you do not have a manager and you go on not having a manager after a few years, or if managers have ended up turning you down, or if you change managers every 6 months, like some singers are wont to do, then I do think there's a problem. On the power of managers, indeed, they have a very big power, because they are the ones they are the interface between the singer and the theater. So they have a huge power, depending on how they present things to you, depending on how they introduce their singers, may have a huge influence on how you're going to make the situation. I am not interested in big names as far as managers are concerned. However, my experience has told me that there are some managers I can trust and some managers I shouldn't trust. Yeah. My experience shows me that out of 20 singers a manager sends me, 18 will be good, and out of 20 singers another manager sends me, 2 will be good. So this means that, unfortunately, for better or for worse, I am prejudiced when I get an email from a manager, if I know it's one of the managers I know and trust, then the singer will have a better chance.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that the singer will get engaged, because even with a manager I know and trust, I'm not going to engage a singer without hearing them and just on the manager's hearsay. But I am better disposed towards a suggestion from a manager I trust and like. There are some managers whom I really distrust because I think they're dishonest, or don't care much for because my experience has shown me that they don't have taste. When I get an email from those managers, I usually end up, how could I say, I am prejudiced. I don't pay that much attention. I concentrate on the emails from the managers I trust. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. Look, Bruno, because I know you have to go. I'm sorry to say, but we do have to round this up. For everybody that's now we've hit into the hot spot of managers, this is for a different conversation that is something that could take up a few couple hours of discussion as to what is a good manager, what constitutes that, if it's better to not have a manager than a good manager, or than a bad manager, etc. But we will schedule that, and in fact, next week we're going to have a session where I'm going to have two young managers. One of them is actually on here today. Christopher Carroll, that you've seen writing a couple times, is a former singer who has switched into being a manager, and it's very interesting to ask why that is. And what I have found is that the younger singers that become managers, and the thing was, is Chris had a career going. It's fascinating because that's usually driven by a passion to try to help this business, which I think that type of energy is something quite wonderful in this business. It's someone that wants to get their hands dirty and start helping the business. And so next week, we'll announce it tomorrow, but next week we will set our webinar to talk with two young managers that are trying to get into this and make a difference. And we can talk about things. And there are also people that are fresh enough that they can say openly, this is what I don't like about managers, this is what I do like about managers, and why I wanted to be one. Before we end, first I want to say thank you to Bruno, and thank you all for the patience and for your patience, Bruno, of having to sign off and sign on. When we spoke on the phone, which the rest of you don't know, is that Bruno was trying furiously for a good 7 minutes just to be able to sign back on, because they kicked him out and he had to redo everything. But what I've done, and we started last week, and it was a big hit, and I want to do this, I warned you about this, Bruno, is I put together, for those of you that are fans of Inside the Actors Studio, I put together a short questionnaire that I just kind of call the NYIOP questionnaire, which gives us an idea into the person that we're talking with a little bit, and it's a little bit fun at the end here. So this, I just ask you to answer these simple questions for the fun of it. There's only 8 of them, and they go quickly. So what is your favorite opera, Bruno?
You're asking me? My favorite opera? Bruno. It's a problem because I would have about 10 favorite operas. I'd have a favorite Verdi opera. I have a favorite Strauss opera. I have a favorite Mozart opera. They are so difficult. Do I have to give you one?
No, you can give me one Verdi, one Mozart, one Rossini. You can give me a few lists.
I'm going to give you a list, yeah? In my favorite operas, you'd find Figaro. You'd find Lucia di Lammermoor. You'd find Falstaff. You'd find Rosenkavalier. And you'd find Onegin. And then I'm going to throw in the Trojans as well.
Now that is a list. Wowee. Yeah. That's an expensive CD purchase, that list. Now, what is your least favorite opera?
I don't like Verissimo crap. I'm sorry.
Just all of it?
Yeah, any of it. Aside from Puccini, which is a genius, I can't stand Ponchielli and Catalani and Mascagni and all that crap. Leoncavallo is nice, I think. but I can live without hearing Cavalleria Rusticana ever in my life again.
Okay. Now, what turns you on about opera?
The emotion.
Perfect. What turns you off?
Ignorance.
Perfect. What character in what opera would you most like to be?
Difficult. These days I'd like to say Falstaff.
Me too. What character in what opera would you least like to be?
Okay, well then to come back to what I was saying, I would say Santuzza because I can't bear that crap. Sorry.
What profession other than a casting director would you like to be?
Oh, I think I could be a librarian or something like that.
Oh, that'd be lovely. Now here's the last one and most fun. If heaven exists, what character from which opera would you like God to be when you arrive at the gates of heaven?
I don't know. An Offenbach character. Something by Offenbach. Yeah, I'd like God to be funny and genial when he gets there. When I get there.
Me too. My weekly joke is I hope you don't say Scarpia. Listen, everyone, and Bruno, thank you. Thank you for your sharing. Thank you for your honesty, for your patience, for the information that was very candid and very useful. Thank you, everyone else, from taking part in this. I hope it was very useful. If you have questions, please write us. When we close this session, a window will pop up with just a couple questions. If you want to answer them, it's very helpful. If this was useful for you, post it on your Twitter, on your Facebook, so people can know. What we're trying to do with these is get this information to the people that need it. None of us ever learned this in school. I have 2 degrees in singing. You don't learn this in school. You learn this by doing it, and usually the ones that know this already are the ones that don't need it at that point. So give us your feedback. Let us know what worked and what didn't for you. We have auditions coming in Vienna in 2 weeks' time, between the 16th and 18th of November, with a good number of houses. You can go online at NYIOP.com and they'll tell you about it. We have auditions in December from the 7th, 8th, and 9th, and Mr. Bruno Michel will be there listening to singers, actually for the preliminary auditions as well. So he will get a chance to hear everyone. He's one of the people that loves to hear everyone. So those are online as well if you want to do this.
If I may say just one final thing, David, if I may, on the question of managers, because we were talking about that at the end, the most important thing about a manager is that you're able to trust them and that you find the right balance between listening to what they're telling you and what your heart is telling you. Because so many singers have a problem with establishing a dialogue with a manager. And for instance, when the manager advises, if you have a competent, capable manager, many times in your life, he'll be telling you, don't do this role. I know you think it's interesting, but this is not a role for you. You've got to grow a capacity to listen to your manager and to accept what he tells you. However, you've got to find a balance because your manager cannot be you and you're the one who makes a decision. So it's a balance between listening to what they have to tell you and respecting their experience and listening to what your heart tells you. And that's very, very difficult. Thank you all.
Thank you very, very much. And take care. We will see you hopefully next week. Thanks for taking part. Thank you, Bruno. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.